Is an update to the set of scripts I'm writing that allows TrainPlayer users to use JMRI Ops Pro as their operations generating engine. And when I first started doing this, there was no advanced ops, so I used JMRI to do everything. And I'm since now calling that the push model, where JMRI does all of it and then pushes the results onto TrainPlayer. But now that we have advanced ops, I don't have to do it that way anymore, even though it's still a valid way for certain circumstances. For other circumstances, you may want to do the pull model, where you use JMRI the least amount possible and put most of the burden for operation onto advanced ops. And so to do that, let's take a look at the layout we're going to use. It's a 1950s transition era model railroad of the Pennsylvania Railroad. So it's got steam engines, diesel engines, electric engines, road switchers, road freight. It's got a whole mishmash of locomotives available. It's got a whole bunch of cars. And what I've done here is I'm now using Ops Central in a lot more detail. So this is all filled out. I've got class yards, industries, interchanges, staging tracks, XO reserve, and now the industries tab is filled out in great detail. So it's got every industry that's on the layout is now on this tab, and whether it ships or receive, whatever its commodity is, it's put into the load category. So instead of using JMRI loads, which I did in a previous video, I'm now using TrainPlayer loads, and it gives you a lot wider range of loads to choose from. It's easier to change your mind. It's a lot more editable. So for some circumstances, this is a preferable way of operating, and so I'll show you how that works. I'm going to close this window and lower this down. So before we start, we're going to look at JMRI. This is the train we're going to build today. It's RL42. It's a local. It starts in the yard. You pick up the power, you pick up the caboose, you go pick up the train, you head out to an industrial park, you service the industries there, and you head back to the yard, you set the cars out in the yard, and you set the power back at the roundhouse. And we'll take a look at some of the details of the train. So it does all that. These are the locations, these are the cars it serves. But in particular, you can use either a steam light freight locomotive or a diesel light locomotive. And it's specifying that it wants one locomotive for your train. Now, one locomotive in JMRI can be a single locomotive or it can be a consist of locomotives, depending on how you set it up. Also, I hit the caboose flag, so it's going to require a caboose for this particular train. And also, before we start, I want to take a look at some of the industries, in just one industry in a little bit of detail to show you how this works. It's going to a place called Park, and in Park it's going to service these industries, one of which is called Freight House. So let's take a look at Freight House. It's just shows you the trains and the car type. It only services one car type, that's a box car, and it has a schedule. The schedule is for this box car type, it can receive a load and ship an empty, and also for the same boxcar type, it can receive a load and ship a load. So for boxcars, which are the only cars that can go to the freight house, it can ship, or it will receive a load. It has to receive a load, and it can ship either a load or an empty. And you can see here that even though I'm still using custom loads, I'm only using two types of loads, or two names. It's either load or empty. I'm not using any of the JMRI load names. It's just a plus or a minus, on or off. It's a toggle. The car is either loaded or it's empty. That's all JMRI knows. Advanced Ops fills in all the details. So let's blah blah blah. Let's build that train. So we'll build it. We'll review it. It looks like it's going to pick up the diesel engine from the car barn and one of these caboose from the cabin track. It's going to go to the yard, pick up these cars from the outbound track. It's going to do all this work at industry, pull and spot the cars. It's going to take the pull cars, set them back out in the yard, and then the final work event is it's going to go to the roundhouse, or to the car barn in this case, set the diesel back out and set the caboose back out in the cabin track. So let's see how that looks. We'll go back to TrainPlayer, press M confirm manifest, and it's like, yep, read in the manifest, and there it is. There's the engine that we're going to be using. So it's selected of those three. It could have selected that one, or this one. Those are the types that are allowed on that train. It selected the diesel. Over here on the caboose track, it selected this cabin car. So it's going to use that. So you get the diesel, you head out to the yard, pick up your caboose, and go to the train. So we'll go to the next work event. And there it is. Those are the cars you're going to have to pick up in the yard. Now, you'll notice they're already blocked appropriately, and that's because I had a yard job build the train, and so it builds like the locals, and so the yard job also blocks the train appropriately for the locals. And you'll also notice that the train is loaded according to the types of loads. See, it was pushed or pulled just a designation L. That's all it got. But because of advanced ops, it looked up to see what that L is supposed to be, and it loads the car for its destination. So for example, these cars, the tank cars going to the fuel rack, are loaded with fuel. Coal hoppers are loaded with coal. The cars going to the lumber yard are loaded with lumber, excuse me. And these cars here going to the freight house, they're loaded with goods. Now, I'll show you a little bit of a detail here. This is the freight house that they're going to serve. You can see that they're all marked, they're all loads, and they're all marked with goods. And that's because in that schedule it said it could only receive loads. So all the cars at the freight house are loads. And if we go down here to the locale freight house, you can see that it receives goods. So JMRI pushed the designation load, and then advanced ops loaded it with the load that we chose, which in this case is goods. Alright, so let's move on to the next work event. And you can see it's going to set out those cars from the yard. It's also going to pick up these cars from industry, and see here's the park, industrial park. But you can see now at the freight house, it's now shipping merchandise, which is what the Ops Central schedule said. So see, it's receiving goods and shipping merchandise. However, not all of the cars are loaded. So the schedule from JMRI loads them or doesn't load them. So there's a little bit of flexibility there. It's kind of neat. It's a feature that's kind of cool with JMRI. It's like it'll load it or not load it, however it wants. But now Ops Central will load it with whatever it is that you tell it to. So let's say you didn't want it to load merchandise. Let's say you wanted it to load, wait for it, I don't know, here's one, produce. Okay, moving to the next work event. Boom, there, now the cars are loaded with produce. So editing this thing just got a whole lot easier, but we really don't want produce, we want merchandise. Wherever it went. Merchandise, okay. And we'll go to the previous work event. And so now all those cars that are being shipped are marked merchandise, loads and empties. So it's kind of cool. And anyway, so moving on to the next work event, it's going to take these cars and set them all out to the yard. And then the final work event is it's going to set out the engine and caboose at the cabin track. So since it's setting out this caboose at that track, the track is labeled, so there you go, see, set it out at the cabin track. Boom, set out. So that's the update. Thank you for bearing with me on this really long video.